Hi, everyone. Welcome to our new edition of SuperNova Commencements. I'm Kashi Sehgal, and we are so happy to have all of you here with us today, especially the graduates, both college, high school, whoever's watching. We have a great show for you today, so I want to waste no time in getting our guest on the screen to join us. Martha Brooks is here with us today. Hi, Martha.
Nice to see you.
Hi. So Martha is like Miss Atlanta. Okay, she our global leader in nonprofits and industry. She used to be president and COO of Novelis, which is a huge aluminum and recycling company, a global company. And she is now chair of the CARE Board, which is a huge humanitarian organization, one that I've volunteered for. But they do lots of work with women and girls around the world on poverty, and it's just a fabulous organization. So we're really excited to have you, Martha.
Thanks, Kashi.
As always, everyone, I'm going to kick things off, and then we will open it up to your questions. So Martha, can you tell everybody where you went to school, and do you remember who your graduation speaker was?
Oh dear. Yes, I do. I grew up in Ohio and went off to college to Yale in Connecticut. And our graduation speaker was Kashi Sehgal, who was an author and an astronomer. And
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, kind of being blown away by literally the stars is what he talked about. Very little career advice, but he talked about the universe and how big it was, and you know, that's pretty much what I remember of it. Not a whole lot of practical advice.
Sure, maybe his advice was shoot for the stars.
You know, I hope it was, but honestly, yeah. I don't remember that much. But I did after graduate school. I went back to Yale again several years later and went to business school and management school, and it was Andrew Young, so who was our speaker.
Oh, you've really been blessed with some good speakers.
He was very inspirational, and Atlanta was nowhere in my mind then, because I just never dreamt of living in the South. I was a Midwesterner, and that's it. Yeah.
Well, we're glad to have you. Certainly.
Delighted. This is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in the world, and I guess I'm coming up on 15 years in one place. And I will also say this is the longest I have been in the same city for about 45 years since COVID. You know, it
makes things a little less mobile. Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about your career path from what you majored in college to how that took you to your first job? You taught English in China. You are now leading this amazing global organization as board chair. How did all this happen?
So I had a lot of interests, and I knew I wanted to travel. It was not part of my upbringing at all. And in fact, when I got to college, I had never heard anybody with a foreign accent. Thought I would study maths and sciences, but I couldn't understand the accent of any of the graduate TAs. And I gave up on maths and sciences and went into humanities and studied political science and economics. And you know, as time went along, I was trying to find out how to focus myself, and I just really wanted to study everything. I enjoyed philosophy, I enjoyed French language, I enjoyed all kinds of things, and I was lucky enough to take a year off in the middle of college and worked for the House Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C., and just by luck happened to be there when Most Favored Nation status for China was considered, and for the first time. And my instant response is, you know, those guys are communists, they're our enemies. Why would we ever do business with them? We don't want to trade with them. And then I studied the results of what happened when we worked together with Eastern Europe and learned that when you do business with people in complicated ways, that kind of global exchange causes you to look at people differently, changes people's lives. And so the background paper I wrote for Congress then was hugely supportive of granting China most favored nation status back in the late 70s. And so I kind of landed on the idea of knitting together all my interests. I was interested in diplomacy and business and in law, and I didn't really know how to focus. But I knit it all together, saying that what I wanted to do was East-West trade. And I decided that I was going to try and do joint ventures and licensing and complicated forms of trade between countries that were enemies. And so it was the Soviet Union then.
Taking on the easy stuff.
Yeah. So it was, for me, it was a way of kind of satisfying my notion to promote peace and to get people out of poverty and to do business and to do diplomacy. And I just kind of knit them all together with that theme. And after I graduated, I went off to China because first of all, I went back to Yale and studied every course that was available on what communism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and China, and took it all in, and then decided I needed to live in a communist country to understand what it meant. And that's why I moved to China. And the only way I could get there in 1981 was to take a teaching assignment. And I took a 2-year teaching assignment at a medical college in Hunan, and learned to speak Chinese and to understand their system from the inside out, which, honestly, if anybody had ever told me in advance what I was getting into in any great detail, I would have said, oh, I can't do that. I'm incapable of doing that. I can't survive there.
Right.
I can't eat that. I can't live with that level of heat and that level of no creature comfort, no contact. It took 6 weeks for a return letter with my family, 3 weeks one way, 3 weeks the other way.
Wow.
And I just had no idea what I was getting into. I just knew I was interested in learning and plunged in. And, 4 or 5, 6 months into it, I was just so thankful. And so had learned so much. And we can talk more about that if you want. But I developed a skill of looking at the world from other people's point of view as opposed to my own, to kind of stand in their shoes. And it helped me become a pretty good negotiator. And I did do East-West trade. I did do business between the communist countries and capitalist world, and first in diesel engines, then in aluminum, and now in airplanes and trains and electronic devices and all kinds of different things. But so global business has been my thing.
So you must have such an interesting perspective on the fact that Wuhan has been very much in the news as of recent times with COVID-19, and even in terms of trade and trade policy that's developed over the last year with China. I mean, what are your thoughts on how we figure that out? Are we going to come to some kind of resolution with China? I know this is a long, loaded question.
We must,
Yeah.
Because, it's been obvious to me for many years that we are the 2 most powerful and important countries on the planet, and will be probably for the next 50 years. And we owe it to each other and mankind and ourselves to figure out how to collaborate. And they look at the world in a really different way. And I will say that if you look at the poverty statistics, and the whole world has been very proud of the number of people we've taken out of extreme poverty, a great deal of that success has come from China. And, I witnessed it all firsthand, and going from a place that, didn't even have taxis in the cities where we lived. And I lived in a city where there was one building with an elevator in the whole thing. And it was a city of several million people, one elevator. and now, dozens and dozens and dozens of skyscrapers, and this they created, on their own. So they've been able to create a lot of wealth in their country and with their system. And so there's something that, maybe works okay there. It is not our system. And there's much we can get upset about, and I can tell you many sad stories and personal stories of people I know who have been treated very poorly for their political views, and I hate that. But on the other hand, hundreds of millions of people are out of poverty in this system. And so, there are different ways to work in the world, and we got to figure that out. I continue to work in business. One of the companies on whose board I serve right now has more than 150,000 employees in China, and life goes on. Life goes on. They're back at work. They're working well. We continue to work well. There's a whole lot that's happening under the surface in exchanges that are people to people, company to company, that aren't in our political and media realm. That makes a lot of noise, and I think we need to stop the stirring of the pot and ramping up. It's going to be the U.S. and China together who figure out the North Korea issue, and if we keep throwing stones at each other, we're not going to do that. And that's just one of dozens and dozens of examples where it's really critical we start to cooperate on a medicine and a solution. One of the things that I've been involved with over the last few months is connecting my old students who are now leaders in the medical field, including in Wuhan. I had dozens of my students who were working in Wuhan during the crisis, and connecting them with doctors at Yale and doctors in New York City. And so that kind of collaboration, that's still happening. They're doing webinars just like this today, and they're speaking people to people. And those kinds of connections are worth their weight in gold, in my view.
So this is, we're talking about, internationalism, and, you've been on so many boards. You mentioned a few of them. You're on the Harley Davidson board, which is amazing. Do you ride a motorcycle?
I am no longer on the Harley board. I was on it for about 6 years, and yes, I did. I had not beforehand, and had, in fact, refused.
Is that a requirement of board service?
I didn't want to ride a motorcycle, and then I finally, when I did change gears for my 50th birthday present to myself, I quit full-time work and turned my life into a portfolio life and turned more towards service. But that was when I took up the Harley board as well, because I thought it would be a lot of fun. And yes, I did ride a motorcycle. I've sold it since then.
Awesome. So you were on that board. You were chair of the Board of Councilors for the Carter Center. You were on the Atlanta Food Bank. The Yale Alumni Board, you've just been involved with so many different organizations. What advice can you give to young people about board service and getting started? You're on these illustrious boards. Where do they start?
Well, young people, you start with volunteering, and you start with organizing. And if you begin to volunteer for a group, and then you figure out how you can organize a more impactful contribution. For example, I know something you've done, but to organize a group of people that will fundraise for an entity, or to organize communications such as this. This is an amazing service to people, to help with career advice and different views of the future. But you start with volunteering, and then you apply your leadership skills, however they are. Maybe it's in digital communication, maybe it's in fundraising, maybe it's in figuring out a more effective chain of supply for something. I read recently about a young person in California who was volunteering for their local food bank and came to understand that a lot of the Californian farmers who had contracts with restaurants were basically letting their food rot in the field because their normal buyers weren't buying from them. And this person figured out how to get some more volunteers with trucks and get some people who would go harvest crops, and get some people who would donate money and pay the wages for the farmers who needed to help harvest crops more professionally than a volunteer could, and got that stream of food to the local food banks, and has been responsible for millions of pounds of food to be not wasted and given to those who need help in this time. And those kinds of ideas come up all the time, and it's young people who who see clearly, who see the gaps, while the rest of us old guys are busy doing the things the way we always did them before. So get involved.
That's great advice. Just jump right in, right?
Jump right in. And, there are plenty of organizations that have, formal volunteer programs, but once you do that and you ask a lot of questions, and this works in the work world too, is if you're engaged in a company or an organization and you have a task, obviously you do your task well, but if you want to grow and make a bigger impact, you look at the people who are in your workflow before you and the people who are in the workflow after you, and essentially your customers and your suppliers, if you will, and ask them about their jobs and see what you can do to make it easier for them or make the outcome better. And you're always looking in a kind of a porous fashion around you at an organization, asking questions about the people in the department to the side, if you will. And the more you do that, the more ideas you will have about doing things better, and solving problems for other people and getting the reputation of being a problem solver, as opposed to a whiner or a person that just does exactly, what they're told and nothing more, nothing less. That's a good technique for getting involved in the nonprofit community too. Just, ask lots of questions about how it all works, and you will have ideas and you will improve things.
That's great advice. What about, you're talking about getting involved. What about brands getting involved these days in social issues? What is your thought on this brands taking a stand world that we live in? What responsibility does private business or industry have in leadership today for these issues that we're seeing pop up, Black Lives Matter and even the pandemic? Like, what leadership can these private industries give us?
Well, anybody in power of any kind has a responsibility, and every leader has a responsibility right now. And I have seen some spectacular stepping up to the plate in the private sector. And, I sit on right now 3 public company boards that, probably have, 200 plants in 60 or 70 different countries and several 100,000 people. And, all of them, these are manufacturing companies, and manufacturing tend to be more people oriented and have to take care of the people that are right next to them in their communities. But all of them have found ways to encourage their employees to step up in their own communities. And first it was with respect to the COVID response and communication and supplies and, changing procedures and giving employees time off or paid time off to go help the shut-ins. And, so they found a million ways to operate in their community during COVID. And now, as people have gotten wiser with respect to the racial and economic inequity and injustices that are kind of very deep rooted in our company or in our country and the world, frankly, as people have gotten smarter on that, they have stood up on these issues as well. And typically what I've seen that really works is first a really hard listening and learning. And it's the top level folks who have to find forums where they're listening. And one of my CEOs has spent an hour and a half with 12 different individuals privately just listening, and then now has a coaching relationship with 12. This is a very wide-flung global company who didn't really think race was an issue because they thought they treated everybody the same and everything was okay, and nobody ever said anything, and they were working on all the right stuff, and so they've got the fundamental right values, but he was just totally unaware of the alternate reality or the different reality that his Black employees faced. Mm-hmm. And so he listened really hard and then figured out together with his whole team and the individuals that were living. In his case, they built a committee that was massively diverse from various countries, including all kinds of people of color, and LGBTQ, and really a sound group, and age diversity, and said to this people, your job is to listen hard. You're spread all over the world. I want you to work on these issues. I want you to tell us what initiatives we need to conduct and how to do it. So they're literally calling the shots. And these are people, some are very early employees who would never have had the power to do it, but they now have the ear of the top level of management, and there's a whole agenda developing of work they're doing on the issue. And that's a pretty good recipe, is, listen, develop some coaches who are going to speak truth to power, and then take your power and take action and then check. And they've set some public targets as to how they want to develop the diversity and the power structure of the company, and it's relevant, different in every community where they work. So it's the private sector is going to have a massive impact, is all I can say. And good boards are on this, right? They are having the conversation with the CEO. They are making time in their really busy agenda to dive deep in these issues, and then they're setting up their committees to track the progress. And we just can't let this go. We have a very unique moment in time where we are unfrozen. We're open-minded to really new ways of working, because all the old ones are out the window. And it's such an exciting time for that reason. So people are listening, time to speak and find specific action to take.
So Jeff is listening in, Jeff Hillemeyer.
Hi, Jeff.
And hi, Jeff. And he was on the show last week, but he has a question for you. And I think this is a fabulous question. He says, assuming Martha doesn't have a book about her life, A, what would the title be? Oh. And B, when can we expect it to be published? These are great questions.
The title would be, walk in their shoes and wear their socks. And that's about trying to understand the other side, no matter how alien they are to you. Mm-hmm. And it's a very effective leadership strategy. It's a very effective negotiating strategy, as I mentioned before, because if you go in with your agenda and your wishes and everything you want done, that's natural, that's ordinary, that's what we do. You run up against the wall because they got theirs. And if you go in saying, what are all the things you need to have happen and to make this a better outcome for you, you will be surprised at how easy it is to find a way. And I used to tell my team when we were, I'll pick a weird example. We were in Algeria in North Africa and negotiating a diesel engine license arrangement, and they had for years been trying to do this, and it was all men. It was French men on our team, and they were very anti my joining the team. They didn't want a woman around, let alone an American. And I came in and joined the team, and we began to talk with the other side, who were 100% male and Arab. And after they got done giving me a lot of grief about not wearing the right women's clothes, because I was in a women's business suit, and my having a sense of humor about it, we talked about what they wanted out of it, and years later, I got the feedback from my male colleagues. They kind of told me the truth about how hard they fought to keep me out of this deal, and nowhere near it. And they said, well, people it stopped being an I win, you lose deal. And it started to be the beginning of a partnership and a collaboration. And they were afraid to be shouting back and forth in front of a woman because you didn't behave that way. And so it was a massive advantage to have a woman in the room. Yeah. And I always tried to say, well, first let's figure out how to make the pie bigger, and then we'll divide the shares later. And most people look at it as, what can I take from you so that I got more pie right now? And you can think about making the pie bigger first and dividing it later. Good things happen.
You have perfectly teed us up for the next question I want to ask you. You have basically lived your life in what we would call male dominated industries, which I hate that I even have to ask this question.
3 boys and 2 male dogs too.
Oh man, you are really outnumbered everywhere. What issues have you had to deal with? I mean, you mentioned, this instance where they didn't even want you around in the meeting. How, as a woman, do you get heard in the room? Or how do you address the pay gap, or, how have you navigated some of this? I know it's
well, the very first thing is to do 110% of my homework before everything. And you won't catch me walking in a boardroom without having read every page. And I'm 100% sure there are a lot of people in there who haven't read every page. So to prepare and really know your stuff, number one. To have a sense of humor when you get insulted, and it happens a lot. And it's even to this day. You get talked over, and you just have to recognize it and work at it and be patient. When I was very junior, I was not only the only female, I was always the youngest person in the room. That doesn't happen so much anymore, unfortunately. But I would have this little war in my head about why am I being treated this way, and I'd say, well, it's because I could say it's because I'm female, and I could say because it's my because I'm young, and I could also say, well, it's maybe because they don't know what I can do, and to help them, and then I'd find ways to try and help them, and it was totally ordinary to have a lot of slights, what could have really upset me all the time. And I had enough mentors out there from the beginning. A lot of mentors in different places were super helpful, and they gave me the positive feedback that I needed to be confident I was doing the right thing and I was performing. The other thing I did was try and really, I call it the lean into discomfort. And we used to specifically say that at Cummins. And we did reviews every year where you get feedback from various individuals. And instead of picking the people that liked me and that were super easy to work with, I picked the people that clearly were really uncomfortable to work with. And that's who I asked my boss to call and give me feedback from. And that really, really worked because it disarmed them completely. It's what they never expected, that, oh, she selected you because she thinks that she's not doing something right in her relationship with you and wants to improve her relationship with you. And it worked beautifully. And so, one by one, the opposition kind of drops away. But it's because I gave them a voice to give me feedback as opposed to fighting. I just didn't do that.
Yeah. So that's taking a negative, what could be a very negative situation, and finding the positive and figuring out a way to turn that around to make it work for you.
Yes. And I will say the one critical reason why that worked for me is I got some really good advice early in my career, which was, don't pick the job, pick the boss, and pick a boss who, when they interview you, brags about somebody they hired that's now higher in the organization than they are, that really is into human development and takes joy and pride in the people that they have brought up, and so I took that to heart, and a couple of times in my career I've ignored it because I wanted the job so badly, and I regretted it.
Yeah.
So I've always had bosses who understood personal development, and so I could trust them by I could give them the names of the people who were undermining me, and let them at it. So
let them clear the way. Yeah. That's great. Martha, you've done so much traveling. I have to ask you, what if your travels, you've been to 70 countries? 70-ish?
I'm up
Little
maybe a little bit closer to 100 now. Yeah, might have been
Okay.
old info.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, fine. So my point exactly that you have done a lot of traveling. What does all this traveling give you better insight into, or what have you been surprised by in your travels?
What I've been surprised by is how much a product we are of our own upbringing. And I'll go back to my China time because this is the starkest example I can think of. So when I first arrived in 1981, having had no exchange whatsoever and had never met a Chinese person in the U.S. before, I was busy looking at everybody saying, "Oh, communist, capitalist, party member, good guy, bad guy," and every party member I classified as a bad guy, and 4 months into it, I had this huge epiphany that, oh, had I been brought up here and, read what they were allowed to read and been raised in this society, I would have been a party member because that's who the leaders are. And I'm an organizer, I'm a leader, and I for sure would have, I hope I would have treated my power well and not abused it, but I would have been a party member. And so, that realization at a young age that something that I could grow up thinking was bad and evil and a bad way to be, it was a big revelation. And so that's back to the title of my book, right?
I was just going to say that goes back to the shoes and the socks.
Yeah, it's just a lot of fun to understand different cultures and histories and why they think the way they think, and to find out how many things that I have a blink reaction one way and they have a blink reaction another way, and it's because of where we came from and not a label of good or bad, and that's just fantastic fun.
Yeah, and a lot of fun. So we do have questions coming in. I want to get to some of these. Crystal would like to know, how do you separate your feelings and emotions from difficult decisions?
So, Crystal, I probably tear up a lot in some of them because I feel the emotion. I can't not have it. It's there. But I try to do a couple of things in difficult decisions. I try to have people in front of me who advocate for both sides. I try to really hear out both sides of an argument, and I try to get as much data. But one of the lessons I learned in the business world was that waiting till you have all the information mostly results in a suboptimal decision because time is more important. And I try to once I'm up to, let's say, 80% information fast, I decide fast and I don't look back. And I view the world not as a one right answer, but as a whole series of forks, forks in the road, forks in the road, forks in the road. And I don't really look much back at the path I didn't take. I just look for the forks in my future, forks in the road in the future.
That's great. You mentioned mentors. Walter would like to know, do you have mentors or heroes? And if so, who are they?
The biggest heroes I had were the first 3 CEOs I worked for at Cummins Engine, and all of whom are still around. And it was an amazing, still is an amazing organization, headquartered in Indiana, but with operations all over the world, and highly moral, highly educated, smart people who built a company where all of us had 5 objectives every year that we wrote for ourselves. And, one was about cost, one was about quality, one was about delivery, the other was about customer satisfaction. And then the 5th was, what are you going to do for your community to make it a better place? And it could be anything. It could be, I'm going to work at a battered women's shelter, or I'm going to get on the board of something, but you wrote it down in your work plan for the company. And you were measured on that for your bonus and your achievement at the end of the year. They said, oh, you said you were going to build a Habitat for Humanity house, for a week with your staff. Did you do it? And you've got to prove that you did it. But that notion that you're always giving back to your community, and it's different at different phases of life. At some points when I had 3 little children and a full-time job and a lot of travel, and my husband was traveling with his work, it was stuff like, I'm going to be the assistant coach of the kids basketball team. It wasn't big deal boards because I didn't have the time, but there's always time to give back. And those three men taught me about that. And they also took some very forward-leaning positions. I was trained on all kinds of harassment things that are sort of new wave thinking back in the mid 80s. And we were doing it in Indiana a long time ago, the triple bottom line a long time ago. And these guys were real leaders. And I really appreciate what I learned from them.
Great. It's nice that your mentors can also be your bosses, right? Chantel would like to know what your purpose is.
Well, my purpose is to do what I can to alleviate poverty around the world. And right now, I did it as I built my skills in the business world, and we always had projects everywhere. We had a plant, we had various projects that we worked on these issues. But now I get to spend lots and lots of time on that, both here in Atlanta through Rotary and other organizations, and internationally with Carter Center and CARE and others. But empowering women and girls to take more control over their education, their bodies, their lives, and their financial lives is clearly a really big piece of the recipe. For getting at that poverty, ending poverty goal. So I spend a lot of time with women and girls and trying to teach boys how to have strong girls around them, what it means to have a strong girl in their world. So
they're definitely part of the equation.
Yes, half the world.
Half the world. Jackson would like to know what your favorite country is, given that you've been to 100.
The question is favorite country for what? If it's for vacation and just sort of enjoying life, it would probably be Italy. If it's for outdoor activity and being with nature, it's probably Norway. If it's for my life and my family and my business, and it's the United States.
Yeah. What about for food?
I think Italy and France are pretty darn good, but actually my favorite food is Thai food. So, I don't know how to compare all these things. It's hard to pick a favorite.
Hard to pick a favorite. Anne would like to know what you would do differently if you could go back in time.
Well, I will tell you, I set a goal early on with my husband. We made a plan to focus really hard on our private sector careers and livelihoods, et cetera, for the first part of our careers, and then spend the second half in service and giving back. And, we explicitly set aside money every year as we were working and kind of made a big financial plan for that. But at age 50, I left the full-time private sector workforce and served on corporate boards and did other sorts of things. But what I didn't do was stick around and take the CEO jobs that were offered to me, because I'd made this other plan about giving back to the world and working in nonprofits. And there's a piece of me that regrets not doing that, just because there have been so few women, and I could have, and I didn't, because I decided to do something else. And I feel like maybe I should have, to set the example, but so be it.
I think many see you as a leader, even over and above what some other CEOs have done. So I definitely think you can check that one off the list a little bit.
Just a little, yeah.
So This is a more specific question. Katie would like to know, she just got a job in finance at a manufacturing company.
Good.
And she would like to know how she talks to her manager about salary and when to have that conversation.
Well, if she can get some data about other companies, and I know there are lots of sources out there, and what a fair wage is, and if she has that data, she can share it and say, "Hey, look, I've got these sources that say, you know, my role ought to be paying this. You know, how do you guys determine salary?" And ask them, you know, basically say, "I know that I'm assuming that she feels underpaid. Yeah, I know that
she's just starting, so I guess so.
She's just starting. Okay. So she's just, so maybe she doesn't feel that way. So I guess I would have the conversation about how do I need to contribute? What do I need to achieve to grow in this company? And, you know, and let him know what your objective is, you know, in terms of your final, you know, like to run it someday, or I'd like to run this department someday, or I hope to run a division someday. But let them know what your ambition is, and just ask them to be very clear on their expectations of what it would take to get a promotion. And how, you know, what a really fast one is and what a really slow one is, you know, and she should also make sure she gets some mentors that are ahead of her in whatever. It doesn't have to be finance department, can be any department, and just keep learning about everything she can in other departments in the company, and finding ways to solve other people's problems. So I suppose that actually brings up another thought about something that I regretted. Not once did I ever negotiate my pay. I just which is a classic women's mistake, right? And my generation, we just, you know, we're happy to have a job, but not once did I ever ask for more money. And there were a couple times along the way where somebody came along and gave me like a 50% increase because somebody looked and said, "Ooh, you know, we're not treating her fairly." And I just sort of said, "Thank you very much." Not, you know, what about the back pay? I didn't say that. I probably should have, but I was oblivious, and I was having too much fun with my work. I just loved every job I ever had, and never got bored. So anyway,
well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's not many people can say that. So, you know, do what you love, right?
Yeah. Well, I was excited to go to work every day, and so it's always good to leave a party when you're still having fun, right?
That's true. Yes. Last question, I think, because we're almost out of time. Rebecca would like to know how you maintain work-life balance, or if that even exists.
So I view life in phases, and you know, it kind of works out about every 5 years. Your pattern of life changes. So you know, if you're single and working, that's one thing. If you're married and working, it's another thing. If you have children, young children, older children, you know, so everything in your family life kind of dictates the phase you're in. So I will say that when I had 3 babies, and you know, I took 8 weeks off with each child, and that's it. And then work full time every other minute. And during that, I hardly remember it. I had no time for myself. There was no balance. And I worked, I traveled internationally. I used to say sleep at least one night a month in a chair because I was on an overnight flight to some other continent. And I did that for 25 years.
Wow.
And really intense travel. But anyway, so when the kids were of a needy age, all I could think of was, you know, I'd get up at 4 a.m. so I could get home at night, so I could wake up with them the next day. I didn't do any tourism when I traveled. You know, I just got the job done. I worked on every flight, and every moment was to the children. And so my exercise and fun would be to coach their, you know, I coached every single one of their teams for some period.
Oh, that's great.
So it was like sports. So that was that phase of life. And I don't pretend there was any balance there. It was, you know, a loving husband. I just celebrated my 36th anniversary. and 3 great kids. So that's quite enough. But on the other edges of that, travel, my husband and I would basically make sure at least a weekend a month we would go adventure some other place. We lived in Europe for 7 years and had a lot of fun doing that. And exercise. And I don't spend any time on fashion. I don't spend time on makeup. I don't spend time, decorating my house. There's a lot of things that I don't do because I just didn't really care. I picked the things that were most important for the moment. And I will also say that as life got busier and busier, I kept a little list in my bedside table, and I said, if only I had more time, I would. And I made a list, and I'd get it out in the middle of the night when I was really frustrated. I haven't read a book. I haven't done this. I haven't gone to this place. I haven't called that friend. I wanted to understand Middle East politics, and I never had time to do that. But anyway, I made that list, and after I quit my job, I worked my way through it. And it took me about 6 years to work my way through it when I had some flexibility in my time. But by keeping that list, I made a promise to myself that thing I can't have right now, I will have. And I believed that a time would come in my life when the balance would change, and I will have it. And so work-life balance to me is, sorting out where you really are, and it's constrained. You can never have all things at all time. And those things that you don't have right now that you miss or you want to do again, you just put them to the side and you write it down if it makes you feel better, like it does me. I'm a list maker. And know that another time in your life, you will fulfill that dream. You don't have to have it all at once today.
That is a great way of thinking about that. It's okay to compartmentalize that and create some goals, life goals, right?
And keep yourself healthy all the way around. Otherwise, you just get depressed and you say, oh, all those things she's doing that I'm not. And, or compare yourself to somebody who's excelling in one thing or another, but they're not doing 75 other things that you're doing. So that you could be excellent in anything if you just focused on that one thing, and you've got some other priorities right now. So give yourself a break. Yeah. Right.
Give yourself a break. Great advice. Best advice. All right. Well, there are a ton more questions, but we're running out of time with Martha, so maybe we'll have you back at some point to answer some more questions.
Kashi, good service you've done here. This is kind of a cool thing. A lot of us do a lot of mentoring, and we end up doing it one by one, but you decided to do it to the whole world. So, good for you.
Well, it only works when we have guests like you come on. So we really appreciate that when you spend your time. Everyone, next week we have an exciting show. We actually have 2 shows next week. We have Tanya Sam, who is Director of Partnerships at Tech Square Lab. She's an investor. She's also a nurse. She's on Real Housewives of Atlanta. She covers a lot of bases. So we're going to chat with her next week, and also Ricky Bevington from Georgia Public Broadcasting. So stay tuned, tune in, search for us on the web at SuperNova Commencements. You can pretty much find us anywhere. And I just want to remind our graduates that we're proud of you, and share with us what you have going on. We'd love to keep in touch. And remember that it's a blessing to be a blessing. Stay safe and happy.
One more thing, Kashi. Yeah. So this is just an extraordinary opportunity to continue the learning. I say to our graduates, the amount of, you can spend your time on 1-minute funny videos or 5-minute funny videos, or you can dive in and, the great universities in the world are putting up just some amazing broadcasts. So, if you were interested in international relations or some of the things I talked about today, I'd encourage you to take a look at the Yale-Jackson Institute. And I'd also encourage you to take a look at the Chicago Council on World Affairs. And you can go to graduate school, right there on your own computer. And there's awesome. So much to be learned right now. And I am really enjoying the flexibility of all this. So
sure. We'll link to all of that in our show notes so that you guys can access the resources that Martha just mentioned.
Great. Thanks, Kashi.
Perfect.
You well.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Wash your hands.
Wash your hands.